Hello, so welcome back to the Royal Rota. We've had what can only be described as a Sussex-style extended family break over the last few weeks, mostly because of the UK general election, but that's now done. We can get back into the studio. Now all our political colleagues have vacated it, and we can get back to normal business. The Queen's got a Prime Minister once again. Her 14th Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was re-elected, so she's got a government, and now they can get back to doing what the royal family do best. So therefore, we thought we'd have a little chat about everything that's been going on over the past few weeks. The royal family's been keeping quite a low profile, with one notable exception, of course. But anyway, we're joined by Russell Myers, who's the royal editor of the Daily Mirror. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having
me back. Second time in the studio, I believe. And we won't talk about what happened last time you were in here. And Lizzie Robinson, the producer of the ITV News Royal Bureau, is here, as she always is, the omnipresent face in this studio. Yes, what happened last time you were here?
So just after we'd finished recording the last Royal Rota when I was in, the Duke of Edinburgh crashed his car on a street in Norfolk.
So we're talking, what, January time?
Yeah, January time.
We walked out this door to a few phone calls.
I know, I thought we were going to have a bit of an early day, and then sort of it went a bit crazy.
And that's sort of how the Queen's year started, and it sort of ended in a rather difficult way with Prince Andrew stepping down from royal roles. Now, I mean, a lot of people are discussing whether or not this was or can be described as another annus horribilis. Discuss.
I mean, it's not been great, has it? I mean,
it's
talk
not
about
been greatest,
from start to finish. I mean, you have the Duke of Edinburgh's car crash, which was an absolutely horrendous time for the people involved in it. The fallout afterwards, him having to give up his licence. Yeah. The rumoured fallout between William and Harry, the Sussexes having their own individual problems.
Yeah. So they all kind of confirmed in that ITV documentary aired during the Africa tour.
And then the year was finished with Prince Andrew.
Yeah, the Prince Andrew thing has been going for some considerable time, and we did a whole episode of this programme on Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein, back in the autumn, I think it was, before his interview. And that's led to quite a difficult year for the Queen. So, I mean, when she records her Christmas broadcast, as we think she's doing this week, about a week before Christmas is quite normal, she's got to weigh up how much of that she reflects in that speech and how much, obviously, she just talks about the other Christmas messages and all the rest of it. And that's quite a difficult one to conclude, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we know that they decide on the themes that are going to be reflected on in the Queen's Christmas broadcast earlier in the year. There's a lot of planning that goes into it and what she's going to say, but I don't think she can get away with not reflecting or at least nodding to some of the personal issues that they have had in the family over the last year.
I mean, in previous years, like last year, I remember when the baby comes, she just does a very sort of light touch nod to it, doesn't she? She says it's been a good year for my family. We've had a new addition. She doesn't really say much more than that. She doesn't say, "Oh, it was wonderful. We had a new arrival. Prince Louis came," and all the rest of it. I just wonder how much she's going to be able to talk about what has been a very, very difficult few weeks for the royal family.
Well, I was looking back on when she was. You talk about that subtlety, and when she was speaking about the Scottish referendum. And anything to do with Brexit, it's always this subtle tone. And I think a lot of people will be expecting her to talk about this pretty horrendous year for her family and very trying and difficult time. And I think that if it's anything, if she doesn't face it head on, I think it'll be a bit of a disappointment, to be honest.
Yeah, but she does things subtly, doesn't she? As you rightly say, when she talks about earlier in the year when she was nodding to the country coming together over Brexit, she never said the word Brexit. She never said politics. She sort of said, like in the Women's Institute, wasn't it? People should come together and be more tolerant, I think was what she used. So I just wonder about how light touch she's going to be. I think it'll be quite opaque, her reference to this year.
Yeah, she is very subtle when she does these things, but I just don't think she can get away with not referring to it in some way.
So she's subtle and opaque. We don't have to be. Funny enough, the three of us were all watching the Prince Andrew. Not the Prince Andrew interview, the interview that the BBC recorded with his main accuser, Virginia Roberts. Now, we were all watching that in Kuwait. We were in Kuwait on the Prince William tour. I think we're in Kuwait.
Still in Kuwait.
We were huddled around a TV monitor there. And what I thought was quite interesting, because we've all now seen the Prince Andrew interview with the BBC's Emily Maitlis. We then went and watched the Virginia Roberts interview. But actually, when you put the two together, as the BBC Panorama programme did, it was actually quite a difficult watch, wasn't it?
It was very powerful, and we were talking before that aired about how they would do it, whether they had gone back to her. It seemed that they had spoken to her at least, and that she was standing by her previous statements. But when you've merged the two together, and then you've got her talking on the back of what he had previously said, I thought it was it's another toe curling watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just thought, back to back, hearing her talk about, she's made allegations. Let's be clear. Prince Andrew has very categorically denied the allegations that she's made about him in particular. What no one is disputing is the fact that she's had a very, very tough life, abused by Jeffrey Epstein. But putting up her testimony against his interview was particularly powerful, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't think she said anything particularly new, but just having to sit and watch the two of them together was quite raw.
And where do we think it went so wrong, or how it went so wrong for Prince Andrew? Because I was of the opinion that he did probably at some point need to do a television interview, because Virginia Roberts is saying one thing, he's saying something completely opposite. They both are making different claims. I think he had to do an interview at some point. How did this one go so horrendously wrong for him?
Staggering arrogance, I would say, is the basis of it. His ego got in the way, not listening to people who had been trying to advise him, potentially taking advice from the wrong people. I mean, if it's if you believe the fact that Fergie was involved, Beatrice was actually in the room at the time, that there was no one who saw what a car crash this was. I thought,
because it wasn't just Prince Andrew in the room. I mean, the communications people were in the room, his private secretary was in the room, as you say, the members of the other family were in the room. How did he get through that whole interview without expressing sympathy for the victims? How was he able to say that he didn't regret ever having met Jeffrey Epstein? How was any of that allowed to happen? It's just
unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have thought that if they were sort of game planning an interview like that, there would have been three things that he was going to say. One, how abhorrent Jeffrey Epstein is. Two, how much sympathy he had for the victims. And three, how he didn't do it.
Yeah.
And you'd think that he would have repeated those three things throughout the interview.
And actually, of all those three things, only one thing he did get across was that he didn't do it.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. I was at Pizza Express in Woking. I don't sweat. I don't buy drinks in Tramp nightclub. I mean, we've discussed before, haven't we? He didn't really need to say any of those things. He didn't need to go down the sweat route or the buying drinks route. All he needed to say was, I wasn't there, it wasn't me.
How, as Lizzie says, how abhorrent he found the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of.
Yeah, and you can say what you like about Jeffrey Epstein, he's dead.
Absolutely. Well, and he should have said, it was catastrophic error of judgment. I
regret the day that I ever was introduced to him.
Absolutely, and not anything with the benefit of hindsight. That shouldn't have ever come into it. And it was his ego that got in the way, I think. And the very fact that he came out of that interview suggesting that it had gone pretty well tells you everything you need to know about it.
See, one of the senior courtiers said to me that what they thought they should have done was got all the sort of heads of communications from all the different palaces, Kensington Palace, Clarence House, Buckingham Palace, the head of the Sussex's team, and all grilled him in a sort of mock interview and say, well, okay, what you did right was this and what you did wrong was this, don't do that on the TV. If they didn't do that, what did they do? How did they prepare for this interview?
I think it was most telling when Emily Maitlis had said how they had practiced, how they had gone over the questions. One of the producers had gone through every single scenario. It was very, very well researched. I mean, I didn't think there was any smoking gun, as it were. There was nothing that wasn't in the public domain. There was nothing that Andrews or any of the other communications teams couldn't have been able to find out and just drill it into him. If you're going to put yourself up for an interview like that, then you've got to be well briefed. And he certainly
in a way, the choice of doing it with Newsnight, I think the thinking behind it was they didn't want to sort of pretend they were doing some soft interview on some magazine show. They wanted to say, look, here we are. We put them up against one of the BBC's flagship interview programmes, and therefore that's how we're saying to everyone, look, we've got nothing to hide. It wasn't us, but it sort of backfired spectacularly, didn't it?
Yeah. Even at the end, when she said, "Is there anything you'd like to add?" he still failed to say how much sympathy he had for the victims. Which was
and normally, as you said, we're talking about like if you were going to rehearse these things, you would say, question one, no matter what you get asked, just make sure you say you have sympathy for these poor women who've been through a pretty awful time.
And if you don't, then surely you open yourself up to huge criticism
Yeah.
that you don't or you never did.
Yeah.
And again, there's the staggering arrogance of when being asked, do you regret your relationship with him? And to say, well, no, because it was pretty handy for me because I met all these people in the world of business and I had a jolly good time, thank you very much. And that's the real issue here. And by these glaring omissions, he only has himself to blame.
Now, I mentioned at the top that we've had the UK general election, and which is partly why we haven't been able to find any studio space to do one of these things. What I thought was particularly damaging for the royal family, given that they sit above politics, is that suddenly Prince Andrew was front and centre in the election campaign of all things. And in the debate that we had on ITV, he came up as a question: is Prince Andrew fit for purpose? And that question was put to the Labour leader and the now Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
And
I
at
mean,
that
it can't be
point,
much
I
more
think
difficult than that.
after a terrible week, they had no choice but really to think about withdrawing him from public duties once he becomes part of an election campaign. I mean, it was going terribly anyway, but I think that was
But at that point,
nail
it was
in the
like,
coffin.
we really now need to do something about that. And I think it was, one day later that he announced
Wednesday, wasn't it? Yeah.
Wednesday.
that he was stepping down. I mean, actually, the audience all in that appeared to sort of laugh in a sort of mocking way.
I was about to say that, you know, when the audience were applauding Jeremy Corbyn from saying, what did he say, that it should be slimmed down in some way, or
it needs some reform.
That's
I
it. I
think
mean,
he said,
when the audience are applauding that,
Yeah.
and you've, as you say, you've crossed the boundary, then you know there's absolutely no option. Perhaps that should have been done sooner, and especially when big businesses, charities that you front are dropping you like hot potato, then you've absolutely got no option.
Of course, in the big flagship programme, which actually we've been to. I don't know if you've been to a Pitch at Palace event, but we have, haven't we? And actually, it's a very successful, very good event. It's invested a lot of money in the economy. It's if anyone who doesn't know Pitch at Palace, it's entrepreneurs pitching to a room full of investors and rich folk who want to invest. It was a good
in
event.
a palace.
But you can't really call it Pitch at Palace anymore because they can't hold it in a palace. So it's Pitch at Office. Or
Pitch at Hotel the other day. That's where they had the final the other day. Not at St James's where
Pitch
it was
at home.
supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. So they've moved it and they've had an event. I think the other interesting part about this whole thing is the role that Prince Charles played in all of this. My reading is that nothing of significance happens in this family now without his approval. Very much the shadow king, or whatever we call him, king in waiting. He was on the other side of the world in New Zealand while this was going on, and yet the decision was as much his as it was the Queen's, that his younger brother, should step down.
And William was involved, so it's that kind of top tier we're seeing kind of come together to make important decisions.
What do you make of Prince Charles's?
Well, I felt sorry for
role.
him because obviously he was in New Zealand, Solomon Islands,
Getting zero coverage.
You're getting zero coverage,
absolutely.
and not only had his Duchy documentary been overshadowed by the Sussexes documentary,
which was a good documentary.
It was
really
good,
interesting.
and it showed him in a completely different light.
Yeah.
There's been a big PR machine trying to push him
I liked him
further
trying to
into
build
the
his
foreground.
fence with his glasses, goggles on, and his hat, and building a sort of wicker fence. Or whatever.
I mean, I did feel sorry for him because we should have been talking about these issues, climate change. Solomon
Massive
Islands is
issue,
going to be
climate change,
underwater,
of course, yeah.
In the next few decades if something isn't done.
Well, actually,
climate
weren't you
emergency.
going to go?
I
to
was
the
going to go. I was
and
supposed
why
to go
didn't you?
Because of Andrew.
Well,
and so I was supposed to go on the Wednesday morning. And we were, Daily Mirror is doing a big climate change push at the moment, and it was going to be something that we were really, really interested in. And we took the decision that we couldn't leave this story. It's the biggest story in the world at that time. Yeah. And 24 hours later, then he'd been removed from public duties. Yeah. The other thing I found fascinating is when he eventually came back, and there was a bit of wrangling as to whether Prince Charles had pulled the trigger on his brother essentially on the other side of the world. But what can't be denied is as soon as he came back, he landed at Heathrow, he went straight to Sandringham to seek the counsel of Duke of Edinburgh. Yeah. And at that very same time, William had been doing an investiture at Buckingham Palace and went to see the Queen. So you see these two, Charles and William, working in tandem now to sort out the family business. And it's like The Godfather, really, isn't it?
But it does show you where power rests at the moment. But I think particularly with the Prince of Wales is, what's the Queen now? 93, 94 next year. Very much the Prince of Wales is involved. I mean, a lot of people claim that the departure of Sir Christopher Gite, the Queen's former private secretary, was over disagreements with Prince Charles's team. But whatever the truth of that, it's quite clear that no decisions will happen without him having his input, as he did, even though he was in New Zealand.
Definitely. I mean, and again, he probably felt that that was something that he needed to nip in the bud straight away. I mean, there's a lot of discussion over how much influence he did have, and the senior people at the palace saying, make no mistake, this was the Queen's decision. However,
of course. I mean,
it is of course a changing of the guard. I think it's a very, very significant moment.
I mean, the other interesting thing, he was up in Sandringham, where the Duke is living at the moment, the Duke of Edinburgh, in Wood Farm up at Sandringham. But the other reason he was up there was because he's got a massive plan to turn the estate organic, so, which is almost like he's sort of, okay, I've done Highgrove now, I'm going to turn Sandringham to organic. He's basically, when he takes over, there'll be Windsor next.
When's
and then,
the next
and then
documentary
Balmoral.
coming out? This will be it.
Yeah, exactly. So Prince Charles's organic mission continues. Talking of trips then, let's move on from Prince Andrew. The golf trip, which we were all on, there was Prince William doing his second trip to the Middle East. Now, I believe there was some newspaper, can't remember which one, who said that Prince William had a sort of personal mission to solve the Middle East peace process.
Well, never wrong. The Daily Mirror got this one completely right, I think.
And he was, so last year, if anyone doesn't know, he was in Jerusalem, the occupied Palestinian territories, and Jordan. Did a very good job.
Yeah.
We're all on that one. And then this year he's in another part of the Middle East, in the Gulf states.
So the story that you're referring to.
Right. Was it you that wrote it?
Yes. Well, essentially that trip was very, very successful. It was sort of this huge cross between royalty and politics. He was being very, very statesmanlike. This is what we're used to seeing him sort of move into, aren't we, at the moment? Yeah. He's very, very interested in the Middle East. He's very interested in the politics of the region as a whole. And I think that certainly over the next few years is something we're going to see him return to time and time again.
Yeah.
It was good. It was a great trip. It was
a couple of days in Kuwait, wasn't it? And then a hop over to Oman, and a very interesting and not uncontroversial boat ride on the Straits of Hormuz, which, for anyone who doesn't know quite how important that is to shipping, and what did we work it out was 21 miles, from Iran.
You can see it on a clear day.
You can see it on a clear day. I think we asked someone that, didn't we, just to double check. It's a bit like you can see France from Dover sometimes. So not a dissimilar amount. And then yet the fact that he got into a military patrol boat and went sort of whizzing along, although he didn't go towards Iran, he went away from it, but nevertheless he was 20 odd miles from Iran at that point. Now, I think those images would have been viewed with a little bit of suspicion in Tehran, but it was, quite an interesting point that he was making about how Oman really does have to control all the shipping going in and out of that stretch of water.
This is a really interesting point, actually. The optics of this, of him going to not only this region of the Middle East, but somewhere where the British Navy have a presence. Yeah. The fact that they're training up and coaching the local regions' navies as well, and then him turning up and giving a show of support is something that shouldn't be. Dismissed really. He's showing up, and I think we're going to see him having a bit more play in this sort of arena.
I've already forgotten the name of the tanker, but there was the British registered vessel that was seized back in the summer, wasn't it? That was it shows you just quite how politically sensitive this area is at the moment.
Yeah, and the Navy are now having to escort British ships on that stretch of water, so that was part of the role that he was hearing about when he met troops out there.
Now that was the Oman part. In Kuwait, though, there was a rather interesting conversation he was having with people on the beach about plastic bottles. Well, we were all standing in this nature reserve.
When you say a nature reserve, it was.
The thing is, we were in the Gulf. It was cold. It was grey, and it felt at times like standing on the Thames Estuary, didn't it? But partly that was a big push from him on the whole issue of plastic bottles. It's not just here. It's not it's every part of the world that this is now a problem.
It's kind of echoes of Prince Charles when you see him talking about climate change, and he was at this nature reserve near Kuwait City where he was joining litter pickers, and they were picking up plastic bottles, and he described plastic as the enemy. The
enemy, that's right. Yeah, he said he literally looks at it as the enemy. And you notice how all of his team now carry the metal bottles. When
I know. Well, we were joking with them. You could never be seen with a plastic cup ever again because you're going to be absolutely hammered.
It's like Prince Charles sitting there drinking from a disposable coffee cup, a single-use coffee cup.
But also saying that they recycle at home. He's educating the children. Something that he's talking about with his kids, the next generation. I thought was quite interesting.
staying on the Cambridges and a Christmas theme as well, and we're going to make this we're going to try and make this a Sussex-free edition of
Well, they are on
the Royal
holiday,
Rota,
so,
because they're on
you
their
know,
extended
yeah.
family leave. I now mentioned their name twice though, so not quite free of Sussex things. But William and Kate's have made a cooking programme essentially with one of the UK's best-known cooks, Mary
Most
Berry.
loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary Berry.
Yeah.
How would you describe Mary Berry?
Sort of a national
National
treasure.
National treasure, that's it.
She's not quite at the
Yeah.
Sir David Attenborough level, but
Oh,
I
I
don't
don't know. That's
know.
controversial.
That is controversial.
Yeah,
I think
Maybe
she's
not
up
for.
there.
you think she's up there with David Attenborough?
Yeah, I said
Sure,
this
yeah.
to someone the other day, and they said, "Yeah, she's
Okay, I'm
absolutely,
outvoted
yeah.
on this one. Then.
I know. Well, I was with you.
Okay.
I don't really watch the shows, but Great British Bake Off, and she's transcended
Yeah.
decades of television
Decades of
personality.
cooking, and it turns out that Kate's quite a big fan, and
Well,
has
she
her
has.
cookbooks spread across the kitchen.
Just
by all
at
accounts.
Louis I level,
Absolutely
apparently.
fascinating detail.
Do we believe the story that Louis's first word, or one of his first words, was Mary?
I'm not sure.
I mean, Mary's not a very easy word to say. It's got a r in it for a start, and
It's
a
obviously very bright.
And normally it's dog, duck, or dada, but apparently he said Mary.
So the story is that Kate had told Mary Berry that one of Louis's first words was Mary because she has all of her cookbooks up on the shelves in the kitchen, and that he could recognise her if he saw her.
Right.
And then he uttered the words Mary, and it's.
Right. And apparently they bake pizza bases, pizza.
Isn't
dough.
there a bit of a competition as well? And
in the show there is a bit
There
of
is a
competition
competition
between the two
in
of
the
them.
show.
I think they
So,
cheat,
right.
apparently.
Right, but they talked about making pizza dough at home, or she
Yeah,
does
with
it
the children.
with George and Charlotte at least. Louis is probably just over in the corner reading
Reading the
encyclopedia. Learning new words.
just looking at who's who for the last 100 years.
Yeah, so that, I thought that was quite interesting, and actually it just feels quite Christmassy, the show, though, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's the perfect marriage.
And
I think
actually,
it looks great.
And what's
the show looks
what
great.
was the point behind it? It's not just they're doing a cooking show; they're talking about a couple of William's charities.
Both their charities.
Yes, and he's
um,
filmed sort of serving in a homeless charity as well,
yeah,
isn't
the
he?
Passage, which
The
he
Passage,
became
that's right.
patron of earlier this year.
Yeah.
So he went there when he was little with Diana,
Yeah.
and has been a big supporter of the charity. And he talks to Mary about how he talks about homelessness with his children on the school run.
What do we think of that? I mean, because what he says in the show is that when I'm driving to my kid's school, or being driven to my kid's school, presumably in his Range Rover, presumably, or some nice car, they see homeless people and they talk about it. Now, I mean, there was something in that made me think, oh, hold on, you're going back home to a palace, you're driving your child to a private school, and you're pointing out homeless people in the street. Now, I mean, Kensington Palace might think that's me being really, really unfair on him, because he was helping out, he's a patron of the Passage and all the rest of it. I just thought there was something in there that just sat slightly uncomfortably with me.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think it's a really genuine comment.
Yes.
And I can imagine if you're driving your kids to school, certainly when they were younger, they're looking outside and they ask a question, and he says the children ask something like, "Why don't they go home?"
Yeah.
And I can imagine William giving a very, very honest answer.
Yeah,
and,
and from
that
a lot
comes
of
his
experience
background.
as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, don't forget, you went to that homeless, so there's that picture of
Exactly.
him and Harry at the homeless charity with his mum, whatever it was, 20 years ago, wasn't there?
And I do think it's a really genuine response. I just think that and again unfairly so, it opens himself potentially up to criticism by people who say, well, how would you know? Now, the flip side of that is, well, he does know. It is something that he's very interested in. He is trying to change it for the better. I think it was 10 odd years ago that he slept out and did something for Centrepoint.
Of course, yeah.
And I know you're not
Yeah.
criticising.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that people may think, well, what on earth would you know? You've got this hugely privileged lifestyle.
But the point he made was that his mum was very keen to teach him and Harry that there is life outside the
And I
palace.
think
And
he's doing the
that's what
same,
he's trying to do
yeah.
for his children. I mean, they have no choice. They're in that role. They're going to live in palaces, and he's just trying to expose his children to how other people
Realities
live.
of the
And
world.
I
Yeah.
think I'm not sure he should be criticised.
No,
for
and
that.
No,
again,
no,
I
I'm
don't
not
think it
saying
was.
it,
I just there was something in it that just sat slightly uncomfortably with me.
Yeah,
but I know it's like, as
absolutely.
you articulated very well, the point he was making was that that is a problem, and he doesn't want to. He wants to make sure that his kids know that there is a life beyond the very privileged lifestyle that they have. Segueing very nicely from children and Christmas to children and Christmas, Camilla did something
Camilla,
really,
yeah.
really sweet the other day, didn't she? And she does it every year. She invites
does.
children in.
Children who are unwell. She has them to Clarence House every year to decorate the Christmas tree. They have reindeer in the garden. They have a lunch. It's a very kind of festive, lovely event.
Yes, and there's a couple of charities, isn't it? Roald Dahl charity
And the Helen and Douglas House.
Helen Douglas.
Bonus point if you can name the reindeer that were
there. No. Can you?
I can actually, can you?
No.
Blitzen?
Dancer and Blitzen.
Oh, I got one
See?
right. Blitzen. Okay, there we are. That bonus point rests with you, though. I mean, there were really sweet little pictures of the kids coming in, and actually the kids are either terminally ill or they're very seriously ill.
It's a really nice
It's
event.
a really touching little
And lovely
moment,
pictures of the equerry putting decorations on the tree using his sword with the children.
Yeah.
It's really lovely.
Yeah. Do you remember actually Camilla in one of the documentaries made around the time of her 70th birthday? She was talking about how sometimes she finds these things so difficult that she goes away and has a little weep afterwards. Do you remember her saying that in that documentary? And there must be pretty tough things to do when you're seeing children with such big challenges as those.
Yeah, I mean it's an event that she really enjoys and she does do it every year.
So it's all rather wrapping up Christmassy this week, but the Queen's got a rather big thing to do at the Houses of Parliament this week because, again, we're merging the election theme and the royal theme, but they're coming together because now we've had a UK general election. For anyone who doesn't understand how things work here, that means you have to have a state opening of Parliament after an election. MPs will be sworn in. They sworn allegiance to the Queen, as they will do this week, apart from MPs from the Irish party Sinn Féin who don't take up their seats. And then she's got to give her second Queen's speech. She only gave one a few weeks ago, and she's got to give another one now because of the surprise election we've just had.
We're living in unprecedented times. The fact that she's got to go and do this again, that we knew the last one wouldn't really last for long, and now it would be really interesting to see what happens this time.
What, 6 weeks ago she last went there with Prince Charles? But it's going to be what they call a ceremonially light this time. So there's no gown, there's no crown. It's apparently day dress and cars rather than horses and carriages and all that sort of stuff. So probably because they simply can't make it happen again a week before Christmas.
Yeah.
Do you know she's only missed 2 in her entire...
And tell me why? One...
Because she was pregnant.
Both times?
Both times.
There you go. See?
Good knowledge.
Bonus point there. I've got
I don't know what you're doing.
You can.
You want to do this show on your own next week. Next time you can do it. And then but Christmas lunches this week. So there's the Christmas meal, is it, or reception to thank staff early this week, and then Wednesday they have their big family lunch before the Queen.
Yeah,
then
kind of extended family.
Yes, before the Queen pops off to Sandringham, as she does every year until February. Who do we think might or might not be at the Queen's Christmas lunch?
Well, someone told me that the police officers at the front gates need pictures for some of them because they don't know who they are, because it is quite an extended family
for when the
occasion.
Duchess of Gloucester turns up.
I was like, your name's down, but I've never seen you.
Right.
Well, again, we know that Andrew stepped back from public duties.
Yeah.
Certainly, we're led to believe he's attending family functions. Whether he goes to
this is it,
and certainly whether he goes to Sandringham is a big question.
He's either going to sneak in the back door of Buckingham Palace and go, or he's going to be really brazen and just drive through the front gate and say, "I'm still a member of this family, even though I'm not doing royal duties anymore. This is still my job."
Well, listen, there can be photographers all outside it. They make good pictures, moving footage for you guys, and it'll be fascinating to see if he does go. Certainly the Beatrice and Eugenie will go, and there's been discussion about the pressure on them, how they've reacted to the big fallout. One of them's got a wedding
next year. I mean, that's the.
And again, where
difficult.
does that? So there's certain reports today about that she set a date. She's asked the Queen about it. So where is it going to be?
Well, the last wedding was broadcast live on ITV. We took up the baton and broadcast Eugenie's wedding.
Big happy family occasion.
I don't think there'll be much of a celebration of Beatrice's, which for her on a very personal level is tough, isn't it?
I think whatever they do, it will be a much smaller scale.
Yeah. Because they can't be
sure.
criticised of using any form of taxpayers' money for a big
and that was one of the main criticisms of Eugenie's wedding, that it cost £2 million worth of public money on just security. The fact that they had the carriage ride, the big fancy wedding in St George's Chapel.
We don't know where Beatrice's is, do we?
Well, she said that she wanted a smaller wedding. Now, whether this will be in some sort of castle that nobody can get near, there certainly won't be the amount of attention on it. Whether she might have it in Italy. I mean, her fiance's from Italy, isn't it?
Terrible idea. Make the
for us?
Italian
for us, yeah.
Make the Italian police pay for the security rather than the British police, maybe. And what do we think about whether or not Prince Andrew will do the walk to the St Mary Magdalene Church in Sandringham on Christmas Day?
We're split on it, aren't we? I mean,
You think yes, you think no.
I
So-
think
I
no.
think yes. I mean,
think.
Oh, right, you
stepped
think
back.
yes, no, and I think no as well. I just
Yeah.
think it would be, because otherwise the conversation on Christmas Day was, oh, Prince Andrew turned up.
Exactly. And because, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, and has a member of the royal family ever been booed, actively booed when they're out? And then even on Christmas Day, can you imagine
Yeah.
if there is some form of protest?
Yeah.
I mean, the first year it was the Sussexes, or certainly Meghan's, when she walked into the church, there was about 3,000 people there.
You're not allowed to mention the Sussexes.
So, I mean, this is
show.
three. I mean, it's three and out now, isn't it? So,
I mean, he stepped back from public duties, but he is
Still a member of the
still
family.
going to be taking part in family events.
We
so
shall see. We know that the Sussexes won't be there because they're
For-
spending the Christmas
Period
in
in
America,
America.
we
Yes.
think, although no one's actually told us where they
No.
are, but with Doria Ragland, Meghan's mother.
yes.
So, I mean, that they're not doing any engagements at the moment, but they are Instagramming on a
They're
reasonably
very busy on social
regular
media.
basis.
And Meghan's having meetings about
yes.
Sussex
Yeah.
Foundation
Foundation.
But
launch.
it's, yes, but they're on an extended
be-
family break,
they
and
are.
therefore we will not mention the Sussexes
Again.
anymore. Thank you very much.
I just don't think we can sign this off without mentioning your signature shuffle, Shippy.
And I don't know if
Jimmy,
anyone has seen
I don't know
it,
if
but
anyone
there
has
was
seen,
some.
but if you haven't,
You've
Is
become
that why
a
that
living
paper
meme.
become
You've-
an actual...
Is that why that paper was there?
living
Do you
the
want to
meme
show
now.
Do you want to show us how
Yeah,
it's done?
I've got my own ring binder now, so I don't need it. Is
You
that
haven't
why you
seen
brought
it.
paper in? I wonder why that was.
Well,
there.
you've taken it. You've been a great sport, and you've taken
You
it
have.
fantastically
Yes,
well. But it's provided us with much hilarity.
We've probably
so
confused a
thank
lot
you.
of people who have absolutely no idea what you're
I
talking
think
about.
No,
most people do
most
have an
people
idea.
know what
yeah.
we're talking about.
Right, okay, well, I'm not going to mention it. Well, apart from that very last minute, it was a pleasure having you in. So
My pleasure.
thank you very much for doing it.
Merry
Lizzie,
Christmas.
thank you very much. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to everyone there watching as well. I'm just going to get my papers and tidy
Shuffle
them up.
off.
So
Shuffle
we
off,
will be back hopefully in the new year, and we can do it a bit more regularly now that we've found some studio space. So thank you for watching. It's been a very busy year. Who knows how the Queen will reflect on this year in her Christmas broadcast on Christmas Day. We will find out in about a week or so's time. Will it be another Annus Horribilis or what else could you say, an Annus Difficilis? We don't know, but it hasn't been the best year for the royal family, but keeping us busy on this programme as well as on the news and on Twitter and everywhere else. I hope you've enjoyed our coverage of the royal family, and we look forward to seeing you in 2020.